season 2 with mapped out education, policy, innovation, and ideas.
It's going to take me like 3 series to have a straight face when we start recordings after this intro music. Morning, Tara. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You are the founder and director of the Safe AI for Children Alliance.
That's right.
And as educators and Al's an educator at all sorts of levels and a businessman, I think we are in agreement that children need to be taught how to use AI ethically and safely. But we're also in agreement that despite its brilliant capabilities, Al, the dangers are just ridiculous and every week and things. So our first question is, what is the single most urgent, non-negotiable safeguard that you and your alliance would like to promote to prioritise protection of children using AI?
Oh, okay. So single most important issue.
Yeah, if you like. What was the one thing you'd like to put in place to protect them?
Yeah, it would. I guess it would be not using AI companions for under 18s. By AI companions, I don't. Well, I know you guys will know what they mean, but it's apps, avatars built off the back of LLMs that are designed to act as friends and companions, and to be really engaging to children in that way. And there are so many issues with them that we could go into that would, it's hard to pick one thing because there are a lot of risks to children, but that would be the one at the moment.
And on that specific point, Tara, the evidence would suggest that on those companions, the more and more you engage further and further in iterative conversation, the less the alleged guardrails that sit around that are effective. So there is also not just anthropomorphizing the context of I'm talking to something that's real and emotional, but actually it becomes more and more potentially dangerous as the more you use it.
Yeah, that does seem to be the case, both in with regard to a single conversation, if it goes on for a long time, and then with the memory features built in. There are really no meaningful safeguards in terms of stopping it from saying some very dangerous information, which I'll give examples of. And I think that's the most important reason why it's so critical to address it at the moment. But there are other really important things, like you say, the anthropomorphization of them, which is a really serious issue, because we don't know what that means for real world relationships when children are deeply engaged with something that's always there for them, always agreeing, always reinforcing their worldview. What that means on an individual level for building relationships, and then going out to a societal level. We've already seen with social media the huge effects that's contributed to in terms of polarization, not being able to take different views, these kind of things. It's going to amplify that. But the most important risk at the moment from them is the dangerous information that they give.
I think there was the sad case of the child in America, wasn't there, that ended up committing suicide?
Mm-hmm. There have been several now.
Yeah.
The one that's in the news most recently is Adam Rain, who's a 16-year-old boy, and he was actually engaging with ChatGPT as opposed to an AI companion. But they are built off the back of LLMs like ChatGPT. And I think that really goes towards demonstrating a fundamental danger with them, that they're built on technology that even at the foundational level doesn't have those safeguards built in. He actually started using it for homework and things like that. And I'm sure we'll talk at some point about responsible ways for doing that, because that is a different issue. But that's how he started, and then started engaging more and more on talking about personal things, and then confiding about his suicidal thoughts. And it gave information on how to do that, and encouraged him to keep those thoughts from his parents and others around him. So really, really tragic. And there have been other cases where the AI companions have done that in very similar ways and giving advice on self-harm, restrictive dieting, all sorts of things.
I'm just going to share, Matt. I mean, this is a really interesting area because we talked in our last discussion with our last guest earlier this morning about the sort of Venn diagrams of overlap. And some of the challenges we see with AI when it comes to chatbots is about the fact that often it's a user sign up outside of the educational platform or system. So it's a personal account. There are significant issues when it comes to limiting age-based access to certain technology. But actually, I would argue what you're seeing from a very different reason algorithmically, that's the risk within an AI chatbot is very similar to the echo chamber of some online social forums where young people are accessing peer support and finding the peer support actually encourages them down a negative rather than a positive pathway. So there's a question back to you, which is, does AI just amplify a bigger issue that we have with the way that young people access the digital universe? And should we be looking at AI-specific rules, or should we be applying them more broadly to access to the digital? I'm going to call it the digital universe, but you know what I mean. There's so many different platforms, places, and spaces now.
Yeah, I think there's a big risk of it doing that. Like, it's certainly doing that with AI companions. Reinforcing everyone's own personal worldview, being quite sycophantic, those kind of things, like definitely with AI companions. It's also an issue with just using the straightforward LLMs. Like, you guys will be very well versed in that and how like certain models behave in different ways. So ChatGPT does tend to, like, I'll ask it for a meal plan and it's like, that's a very insightful question. Like, it's just sort of tells you you're great all the time, whereas some of them are more neutral. So there is a risk with that, with the general ones as well. And one of the problems with that is that the creators and developers are designing them for engagement. And as human beings, we like to be told those things. It's sort of in our nature to have someone reinforce our views and give us positive feedback. So, yeah, that's an issue. And that's not to say, and just to make this clear, I'm not anti-AI. I think it can be incredibly useful and have applications in education, but we have to look at the big picture.
So one of the things that often crops up when we think about that is there's a risk in terms of taking a child down a very serious pathway, which is, as you shared as examples. And then there's others where we amplify bias or factual inaccuracies about the world that they live in and the community they live in that can materialize in quite different risks. Sometimes we see those things, within the UK. At the very end of the scale, you've got prevent duty and you've got radicalisation of young people based on incorrect information, through to just the broader, frankly, the one that's probably more endemic, which is just a lack of self-worth and an impact on the child's own persona.
Yeah.
But they all come back to this common question, which is, the large language models and can be used purposefully for a positive output, and they can be used negatively for another. It's all about skills to use the tool. But the question really then comes full circle to, so is it the front door that's the issue, Tara? Is it that where we acknowledge AI can be used for good things and in education can be used purposefully at times and at other times adds no value? Absolutely. But it is fundamentally, we need to be moving closer to how we have a front door that means for those under the age of 18, it's either no access or, more importantly, it's supervised access, where we're actually able to be aware when a child is accessing content that might place them at harm.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for the AI companions specifically. Yeah, just I know as a parent, it's very, very difficult to do that in practice. But that is what I think the age limit should be on them, 18, that they're not suitable for children. But then if you're talking about using the straightforward LLMs, that like children are going to be doing that. And there is a place for that in education. And I think the fundamental problem or main issue with them is that they're not regulated, like OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., have very little financial incentive or regulatory incentive to make them safe. OpenAI in particular, there's like many examples of how they've been irresponsible in terms of safety. So that's really a fundamental issue at that level. Does that answer the question?
Well, I mean, that's going, I would argue, I think a good point. In terms of corporate governance of the main large language models, that's heading in a backwards direction, because now it's becoming more about the monetization and scale of it, which rightly poses more concerns. I suppose the bit I was trying to link to was, on one sense, we've got, this very clear capacity where, well, just by its name, it misinforms a child as to its purpose, that you've signposted. But at the same time, those same approaches to algorithmically taking a child down a rabbit hole are what applies to its TikTok feed and its Instagram feed, in terms of, you've looked at this, I'm going to show you more of that, I'm going to show you more of that, and I'm going to, and they all apply, and it's AI and it's algorithmic. It just doesn't necessarily carry the LLM on the end of its name.
Yes, absolutely. Like sometimes when we're talking about AI, we're all assuming we're talking about generative LLMs, etc. And yeah, it's much wider than that. So there's that algorithmic issue as well, which is going to get more and more sophisticated. I can only see that issue getting worse without regulation.
I guess this is our teaser, Matt, into telling us about some of the ways to give us some positivity that you, working with others, are identifying there are ways that we can push back, fight back, signpost differently, better inform, educate, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So just within that then, Tara, there seems to be within education, or the areas where I see the discussion, it's very black and white, ban it or use it. And I just think, with this day and age, I think the ship has sailed in terms of children using technology. It's out there. You can't just introduce the 18 age limit. So the importance of educating all ages on technology and AI and the dangers, as well as the uses, whether it's generative AI or large language models, that should be, to me, that should be front and center of education policy now, is that everyone should be educating children, learners, of the dangers and the benefits, because until they know how to use it ethically and when to use it.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm only saying the age limit for platforms like Character, Replica, that kind of thing. Like this sort of dichotomy that you talk about, black and white, use it or ban it, like that's really unhelpful. You can't ban it. It's there.
Too late.
Like, it's not going away. And children are moving into a world where that's it's going to fundamentally change the world and their futures in one way or another. So they absolutely have to be educated in how to use it well and how to build it into education well. And obviously there's loads of conversations about how to do that the right way, but I absolutely agree that it needs to be part of children's education in one way or another.
And the families amongst them as well, because we've got generations sort of in the middle, haven't we? And certainly I worry about my parents, and they can't do online banking. I'm thinking, well, in a couple of years, all the banks are shut down and everything's been done through artificial intelligence and online. There's a whole generation now that are lacking the skills, but it's...
Definitely. And if children aren't being educated well about the AI itself, so that's moving slightly away from safety, although all of this is linked, I do think it's doing them a real disservice, because they need to be able to enter an AI world, and that has to be done really well and really thoughtfully, but especially perhaps for older children who are going to enter the workforce soon, and it's going to be very AI driven. They need to know about that and how to adapt.
And we was chatting before we started the recording, we were chatting about misinformation and deep fakes, and then you mentioned a new app that I'd not heard of called the Nudifying app. And this is now, I'm guessing it's not just one app. I'm guessing there's a whole host of things. We used to have the face ones and the filters and things.
Yeah.
And they're out there now already. So, what?
That's another big issue that is going to be happening in schools very, very soon. because they're very easy to access for kids. And you just put a photo in and it generates a nude photo of that person. So, well, I don't need to tell you how harmful that could be.
Yeah,
And
so
then you
cyberbullying is just
bullying.
going to go
Yeah,
off the
and
chart.
teachers as well, by the way. It's not just going to be children doing it to children. Teachers are vulnerable to that as well, but
Yeah,
kids doing it to them. Yeah,
it's terrifying, isn't it?
it is.
So we've mentioned large language models and the concept of that. You've got these massive data sets that just basically embed the human biases. I just want to just ask you about small language models, because Al's far more intelligent and informed than I am, but I'm quite interested in this concept of small language models. I still feel kids and learners and adults of all ages need to know about large language models and the dangers and the benefits. But small language models in schools and little language models with safeguards built in, whether it's keywords or, staff being able to see what they're actually talking about, that seems to me to be the future of AI within education, done through small language models. What would you think about that
I think as a concept, that
as a concept? Yeah.
can be sensible. I'm not a technical expert on what the risks are from that, and I'm not an educational expert. I want to always be clear about that in terms of how best to educate children. But as a concept, that sounds spot on to me.
I'm going to throw some challenge at both of you from a different perspective. I don't disagree, but it's always good in our conversations to have a challenge. So one of the problems with, if you have a yin and a yang for a small language model, is on one sense, you've got control, you've got guardrails, you've got limits about what information that large language model is there to serve up.
But then it's you controlling it.
Yeah. But then the flip side is potentially by having a limited data set, having a limited set of parameters that it's able to run, potentially you either get bias or, more importantly, you don't give the full picture, shall we say, of a topic.
Yeah.
And so one of the challenges that I see, which I think is really helpful in this conversation, is on one hand, we want to keep children within an education context protected from their data, their information, their biases and nuances being shared into this training data, these large language models. And then on the other hand, we also have this challenge, which is we say one of the weaknesses of these large language models is their data doesn't reflect us. And there is a challenge there, which is if we want them to be purposeful and want to be reflective, and I always use the example of a conference in Saudi Arabia where they say 8% of the world speak Arabic, but only 3% of the internet, and the training data is in Arabic. So we're underrepresented when it comes to output in AI. The same applies. If we don't ever want to share our data with large language models, how can it ever be truly accurate and purposeful for schools to use as a reference point or a checkpoint in what they're doing in education?
Yeah.
Is there an answer to that, or do we have to accept that?
No perfect answer, is there?
Yeah.
No.
It's definitely a valid challenge. There are so many valid challenges and issues because this is also new to us. So we haven't had time to catch up. So I don't disagree with that.
I think the key, which is we allude to in the education setting, is what we do in the education setting is done with some shepherding and nurture. There's some oversight, there's some guardrails, there's a human in the loop to be able to see when a child deviates too far from what they're expected to do with their use of technology, and hopefully not just catch them, but also educate them and their peers as to why not to go there again. That's the whole digital citizenship piece, which is so fundamental. Once we step out of the classroom, we go home, then there's a whole different set of concerns, particularly if we don't always have a parent cohort that are digitally literate or supervising in the right way.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the challenge comes from. I'm interested in more information, though, in terms of, from your perspective, Safe AI for Children Alliance. That's about bringing like-minded people and businesses together. What would you say are the key kind of pillars or the key tenets of what you're trying to achieve as a collective, Tara?
So first of all, it's what you would expect, protecting children from those fundamental risks of being given dangerous information, deep fakes that could affect their education and democracy going forward. These kinds of things that you would really expect are purely to do with protecting children right now from dangers. And they are really dangers that I'm talking about. Excuse me. So that's the first aspect of it. And while that is linked to schools and education, because schools have like an unparalleled reach to educate children and keep them safe and reach their parents as well, it's not about education directly. So it's pure safeguarding, even though there's always some crossover. The next aspect of that, though, that we will look more at going forward, we'll always focus on those present day harms to children, but something as we grow that I want to move towards a little bit is making sure that those future generations are well informed, able to use AI really well for the future workforce, but also something I don't really hear talked about at all is that they are educated in a way that makes them equipped to make AI safe in the future. Because particularly with the risk of job displacement in entry-level positions, certain careers are going to become less attractive to children. That then obviously has a downstream impact on how they're being educated. If they're not entering the professions that are most relevant for developing safe AI systems and developing AI responsibly, then we have a real problem there. And that's not really something I hear talked about enough. And then the third aspect of what we want to do is just contribute meaningfully to the societal issues around AI.
There's some really good stuff in there, and absolutely, they're all tenets that I think everyone can clap their hands and say absolutely. The conversation around equipping people to move to use, and I guess it's about AI governance in the workplace, is taking forward the right ways to safely utilize AI moving forwards, has posed quite a big question, because typically we use labour market information, LMI data for different regions that says in our region there's a shortage of skills X, Y, and Z, and we need these skills in order to grow our economy by a certain percentage. And the argument coming now is that in many organisations, the economies of scale are that first layer, we can replace those junior people with an AI bot. It can do our translations, it can do our calculations, it can do something. And then the conversation then says, but what happens in 2 years' time when they're due for promotion and there's nobody to promote to be our junior managers? And where do we now bring in that muscle memory of governance and safe use of technology? We're suddenly pushing more and more people who haven't got the technical knowledge higher up the chain and backfilling with what? AI without shepherding, without control and nurture. So I guess that's the bit that really amplifies the need for the bit you're talking about, Tara.
Yeah, that long-term thinking is really, really important. And I think that's there's not enough of that at the moment. Like, it's very easy to say AI is not going to replace humans. There's always going to be a human in the loop, et cetera, which is a valid point. But you have to think about how practically that happens, like largely in terms of those entry level careers. If they are not really there, obviously you have a problem following that.
So when you're talking long term, and nothing I disagree with, and fascinating listening to you too, but the speed of AI development is just amazing. So when I see an expert saying they're an expert, well, straight away, no, you're not, because nobody can keep up. And I think it was refreshing how that, as it Dan Fitzpatrick came out a while back and said he can't keep up. And it's literally his living, and his job now is to try and keep on top of AI. And you think, how are we possibly supposed to put in short, medium, and long-term safeguards and plans when actually the sheer speed of change and development is proceeding with no safeguards in place? Like, OpenAI can do what they want. Musk is jumping on board, and not jumping on board, he's already there. How do you keep up with it?
It's in terms of like on an individual level, keeping up with it, it's impossible. It's like you just got to try your best. But like, I had to have some time off over the summer, and when I was coming back, I was thinking, like, how can I possibly keep up with the 2 months that I've missed? Now, you wouldn't ever really think that in any other field. How can I possibly keep up with 2 months that I've missed. But it's just a fundamental challenge of AI and AI regulation, AI governance, AI in education, that it's so fast. And
is there a challenge, Tara? We've had Moore's law for years. That context of technology gets, twice as fast for half the size, and it's an ever evolution there. And the same applies when it comes to AI and the pace of change. The thing that I try and come back to with all the different folks we speak to and the kind of resources that I read and sometimes try and share purposefully, the big challenges in keeping a grip on governance and oversight of AI don't require us to know about the change of model from yesterday to today. The same questions apply. There are continuing growing risks, but the key is to have the framework and the check and balance, that those kind of what are our standard considerations about what tool do we use, what information do we share, where do we share it, how long does it exist, how do we monitor it, how do we check and make sure people are keeping safe. And for me, it feels like the more important part is not to understand every single AI tool, because none of us are going to be equipped to do that effectively, but to keep having the same evolved set of questions and frameworks we put in place. That feels like why we're seeing companies having a growth in AI governance policy. The EU AI Act put more onus back on to anybody utilizing AI for the transparency, the signposting of it, albeit with the sword of Damocles of some bigger fines. But we're kind of moving into we can't control it. What we can do is make it more visible, more transparent in some shape or form.
You're right that there are definitely fundamental core issues that are going to stay there. So yes, when I say about keeping up, I mean with the nuances and the conversation and the more in-depth stuff that we go into and specific apps that are coming out, which like in our field, it's important to know about, but there are fundamental issues that aren't going to go anywhere. Absolutely.
How frequently are these new apps that you shared coming out without sort of the specifics? I mean, is this a weekly update where you're seeing replication of risk and different trends for learners? I mean, it feels like it's getting quicker and quicker in terms of the social engineered AI apps that place harm, more prevalent for users.
Yeah, they're increasing really quickly. I think a recent study by Common Sense Media found that about 70% of teenagers in the US have got like an AI companion, because there are loads of platforms available as well as the big ones. So yeah, they make a lot of money, so they're increasing all the time.
How do they make money, can I ask? Are they subscription based or?
Yes, yeah, there are free versions, like with most things, that you get ads on and not all the features, and then they pull you in with subscription models to upgrade. Yeah.
So you've spoken at the UK Parliament and you sort of work with various international bodies, if I've got that right. So given what we've just talked about, what are those basic regulatory safeguards that we need to get in place now? Because I know Ali just referenced the EU, and I think in 2026 they're passing legislation that says everybody has to identify an AI generated, has to clearly identify AI generated images, videos. And you think that's great, but A, why are you waiting a year to bring it in? It'll be legislation, so it has to go through various bodies. But B, even when you bring it in, it's not going to be followed by everybody. So if you could choose a set of 3 basic accountability rules, frameworks, legislations, working with all these regulatory bodies, what would you do? You've referenced the age thing for grief bots and chatbots.
Yeah, that would be.
That makes sense as number one.
I think so. I think the EU approach of like grading things of low harm, low risk, medium risk, high risk is a good idea.
Yeah.
So I would make that more across the board. And obviously, if you have something like an AI companion, that's going to go further up that scale. So yeah, there's that. What else? I would say sort of this is a more generalized answer to that question rather than a regulation. But if you look at what's happened with OpenAI in terms of the court case that we talked about, they have said after that, we will bring in certain safeguards to help protect young people. Now, I don't know if those safeguards will be meaningful, but the bigger point is that they are capable of looking at harms to children and putting those safeguards in. So my question would be, why were they not there already? So these companies do have some understanding of the regulations that would make things safer. They just don't implement them because they're not to their financial advantage. So they wait till a serious harm is done and then they have to implement it. So they do know what would help. They're just choosing not to do it.
Thank you.
It's pretty cynical and pretty rubbish, but absolutely true that there's a sense of, if you know that you could put in place better safeguards, why do you need to wait? And why isn't that part of the core decision making around the innovation? I mean, it really is very, very sad. Anyway, we are at a kind of a crossover point. Half an hour's chatting with you. I'm sure we could go on forever. And in the spirit of what we've just talked about, if we connected again next week, there'd be some fresh topics that would have cropped up to talk about. Folks listening who want to find out more about Safe AI for Children Alliance, perhaps interested in getting involved, either as individuals or as organisations, where can they find you, Tara? And what's the best first steps?
So the website is safeaiforchildren.org. And first step, other than like having a look around the resources we've got on there, is just to sign up for the newsletter, because as we grow, we'll be developing new initiatives to help and come on board. So yeah, that's the best way to do it. And then for like educators and professionals like yourselves, we're on LinkedIn as well, both like me as an individual and the organisation. So look us up on there too. Yeah, that's the best way at the moment.
Fantastic. Thank you,
Thanks,
Tara.
Sarah.
Been a pleasure. And yeah, really appreciate you sharing your insights with us.
Thank you both. It's been really good to talk.
Thank you. Cue cheesy music.